trust. There was a time in my life where it was nothing you could really say. I was always going to believe that you were lying. And, ooh, part of that also was because I was lying to myself.
Elevate with Monique. Elevate. Elevate with Monique. Elevate.
Hey girl, hey. So we are still talking about all things healing and acknowledging our inner child, right? And so I've been talking here lately about just some of the characteristics that show up that may be indicators that maybe you have some healing to do when it comes to that inner child, right? I did a recording, an audio just today because I was on social media scrolling, and one of the posts that I saw just was a reminder. It's just like it's so apparent and so evident that yes, you have to heal that inner child in order for you to be able to thrive in life. The post said, "We realized we both needed childhood traumas to be healed." And this was a post from a couple who they were going through divorce, and then something caused them to stop and halt and pray. And through that journey, they realized that there was some childhood trauma there that they both had been holding on to and brought into the relationship. And that was one of the things I was talking about on the audio today, is that your relationships are absolutely affected by what you bring into that relationship. And if you bring childhood trauma, 9 times out of 10, it is going to show up. It is going to show up in the way in which you engage with that person. It's going to show up in the way in your behaviors and just the way that you perceive them in the relationship. And so this work that we are doing, I want you to be proud of it. I want you to celebrate the fact that you have made a decision to no longer stay in that place of holding on to, walking around with, and operating from a place of inner childhood trauma. So last week, I kind of focused on the narrative of my life around anxiety, right? And how the lack of control that I had caused anxiety in my life. And I realized that that was because there was some unresolved trauma. And if I'm being completely honest with you, all of the topics that I'm going to bring to you around being able to recognize childhood trauma are things that I myself have either experienced, or because I've learned what those behaviors and characteristics are, I can see them in someone else, right? And so last week it was all about having control, the fear of letting go of control, and the anxiety that it brought on. But this week, it is all about trust and the trust factor. This is absolutely one of those things that, if I can be completely honest, I would say I struggled with this topic and this characteristic. Trust issues for me started long before I really even knew what trust was. And part of that was just because of the absenteeism of my mother, right? And so it brought on a level of distrust. And then even just some things that happened as we were reacquainting ourselves with our relationships, and things that just happened. So, it definitely was a foundational break in my early childhood years that I then carried on through life. And so I have some questions for you that I want to ask you, and I want you to be honest. I tell you all the time, lying to me is really lying to yourself, because in order for this to work, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be able to say, yes, that's me. Yes, I have experienced that. Yes, I do that. Okay, so have you ever found yourself hesitating to like fully put all of your trust into someone, and that made you doubt them, that made you question them? You just struggled with trusting, just giving trust. I know one of my favorite sayings, and I hold this true to this day, is for me, trust is earned, it's not given. And for some people, trust is given and not earned, right? But do you find yourself, or have you found yourself just struggling to really trust people and just give them the benefit of the doubt like that? I definitely have. Do you ever wonder why you struggle to set boundaries in your relationships, or you find yourself consistently seeking validation from other people? Oof. Baby, I was the validation needing queen, okay? I wanted for people to tell me that I did a good job, or that something that I'm bringing to the table is appreciated, right? I wanted to be validated by other people so much because I lacked trust in myself. I lacked trust in my decisions. And we're going to talk a little bit about, trusting yourself as well, because sometimes we forget about ourselves when we think about where we stand on the trust line. But because of the lack of trust that I had in myself, I found it very difficult for me to really trust the decisions that I was making and the things that I wanted to do. And so I needed other people to validate that for me. What about you? What if I told you that the root of these hesitations might be due to unresolved childhood trauma and centered around trust? Now, if you had any sort of childhood like I did, growing up wasn't always just the best circumstance. So there was a lot of reasons around me to fortify my lack of trust that started at a young age. A lot of things that were happening around me that just really etched in me that you can't trust people. No, I'm not trusting them. I'm not trusting what he said. I'm not trusting what she did. I'm just not trusting it, right? And so because of that, I grew up unknowingly with this thing. Like it was a norm for me. It was a norm for me to not trust people. It was actually when people gave trust so easily and so freely, I looked at them like they were crazy, right? And I think that there's a balance to that. I think you can be too trusting and almost kind of be naive, but then you also can be so untrusting that it's hard for people to break down that barrier and break down that wall. And so I think that I was definitely further on the distrust side than I was on the closer to the naive, because I just trusted so easily. But it was unresolved trauma there. And as I grew up and I started to realize that some of the relationships that I had were just so not reflective of what I wanted, I started peeling back layer by layer what kind of things I was putting out into the universe in order to get those things back. So I was lacking trust, but that's because I was giving that energy off. And I started to realize that with some of the other areas that I also struggled with, but trust was in there as well. And I had to start challenging myself, how I was going to show up with my relationships with others. And it was, I would be lying if I said that I have it down to a science right now, because I really don't. I mean, this is probably one of the ones that I don't know that I'll ever be 100% there. I still stand on trust is earned and not given, but I'm willing to be open to allowing someone to earn trust. There was a time in my life where there was nothing you could really say. I was always going to believe that you were lying. And part of that also was because I was lying to myself. right? Not only was I not trusting myself, but I was delusional. I was lying to myself. I'm so worried about all these other people who aren't trusting or trustworthy, but really I was lying to myself because I wasn't trustworthy either. And I was thinking that it was just everybody else and not me. So I'm gonna pause for a second. Do you find yourself really struggling with going all in with trust? I'm not talking about being open and letting someone earn your trust. I'm saying you are absolutely like, no matter what anybody says, you always gonna have that little thing in the back of your mind that's like, I think they're lying. Do you? So think about it. It took me a long time to unlearn this behavior because it had happened so long that I didn't know where to start. I didn't know where to start as it related to figuring out how to trust other people from a place that was genuine, because I wanted this in return. So I needed to learn how to trust other people. And I'll take a step back. There were things that started to show up in my life that really showed me that this trust thing was huge. And it wasn't even just from relationships, like romantic relationships. It was even just from like my friends, right? And one of the things that showed up in my life that I started to realize is that it was difficult for me to maintain friendships, period. It was hard for me to trust others, which then made it very difficult for me to connect with them, because if I didn't trust them and I always thought that they were lying, then there was a breach right there, right? I was afraid of being abandoned again. I was afraid that if I gave someone my trust, that they would take advantage of me. I was afraid that I would look like a fool if I trusted them. And so it caused a lot of disruption in my relationships. They just weren't solid. They just weren't built on solid foundations. Another thing is I was fearful of just being vulnerable. I just mentioned that I was afraid of looking like a fool. Well, part of trusting people is putting yourself out there and saying, this is a risk that I am taking, but this is a risk that I am willing to take, right? I'm willing to take this risk. I'm willing to open myself up, AKA be vulnerable, in order to see if this relationship is worthy of the trust that we can build within each other. And so I didn't do that very well. I was very afraid of being vulnerable. Another behavior that showed up for me was I was overly defensive about everything, like always having, this negative response when people would tell me something or when they would check me. I was always just negative and defensive and suspicious and questioning everything around me. And that was a behavior that I realized, like, I got some issues with this trust thing. Like, it's really causing me to question even people that haven't done anything to deserve me questioning the trust. Right. And then it goes back to what I said, affecting the relationship, because after a while, people get tired of you always thinking that you're the one that's doing something wrong. What is the saying? Usually when somebody is always accusing you of being wrong, it's actually a reflection of themselves. Yeah, I do believe that to an extent. There are some times where that person is really wrong. Like, it has nothing to do with you at all. They just are wrong. But when it comes to always suspicious, always wondering if anything that they're telling you is the truth and you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt, then that's, you're being defensive. Your defense is up all the time. My defense was up all the time. Another behavior was, it was difficult for me to trust myself, like I mentioned before. And this was one that I didn't even realize was a thing until I started breaking down what trust actually meant and what it looked like. And at that time, I was fully immersed in my journey, and I was very curious about different things and different ways in which I showed up. And so I started asking myself questions that helped me to realize I don't trust myself. I don't trust my decisions. I don't trust that I have what it takes. I don't trust the business plan. I don't trust that I can actually do that thing. I didn't trust myself. And so that was another indicator for me that I have trust issues. And it didn't come from my adult life. It came from me being a child. I had to go back. I had to go back. I had to go realign with her. I had to go reconnect with her. I had to go and remember her and listen to her for her to tell me that I did not trust myself. And then just the last thing that I would say was a major characteristic or something that showed up was I had a huge debilitating fear of abandonment. Okay. That fear of abandonment caused me to not trust people because I didn't want them to get that close. I didn't want them to get close enough and then leave me. And then, I'm back in this place of feeling the pain and feeling the hurt and the rejection that I felt as a child. And so I was afraid. I was afraid that they were going to leave. But little did I know that I was pushing them away anyway. I was pushing them away. So, I want you to know that these struggles and these behaviors, they can be addressed. They can be reversed. They can be replaced. But you have to be willing and you have to be open. And so for me, I wanted better relationships. I wanted more authentic relationships. And so I was dedicated to challenging myself to cultivate more of a trusting mindset, cultivating a relationship with myself to where I could start trusting myself. I had to do this little by little, and it was not easy at all. It was not easy, but it was possible. And I knew that I wanted it. I knew I wanted to send out the right energy so that I could start getting back the right energy. And so I went through kind of 5 steps or behaviors or pathways to build trust and to heal that part of my inner child. Now, mind you, if I think about my inner child, I think about it like a puzzle, right? There are so many different pieces and layers of her that were hurting and broken and unseen, that there were pieces that I was healing, but then there were still pieces that were unhealed yet. But when I started focusing on trusting myself and learning how to trust myself, these were 5 of the pathways that I took to work on that part of the healing for me. The first one was I acknowledged and validated my feelings. You have to acknowledge and validate your feelings. Your feelings are there for a reason. They are a barometer. They are a sensor. They are there to indicate something inside is either good or bad, up or down, hot or cold, or whatever you want to call it, but they are there for a reason. Now, it's a difference between operating from your feelings and acknowledging your feelings. I'm not talking about operating from your feelings. I'm talking about acknowledging them. I'm talking about letting them know that you see and feel them, not pushing them down and pushing them away and saying, I was 10 then, I'm 30 something now. No, that 10-year-old is still hurting. That 10-year-old still needs some attention from you. So don't ignore how she is making you feel right now. Another thing is I had to identify my triggers and my patterns. What kind of things was I doing? What kind of things were cyclical for me that continued to produce the same results? What kind of things were pissing me off to the level of lack of self-control because of this trust issue that I had. I'm fighting all the time with my significant other, or, I'm accusing them for things that they're not even doing. Like, what kind of things are happening that are causing me to feel this way? I need to see those. I need to acknowledge them. I need to see what kind of patterns I am operating in so that I can start to make change. And that's what I did. Number 3 is exploring the root cause. I want you to get so good at going inward and exploring parts of yourself that when something comes up, it's kind of like, oh, okay, this is there. Okay, well, let's deal with that. Let's figure that out, as opposed to running from root causes. Now, as you're exploring them, they can feel uncomfortable, and they can even bring up shame and hurt and embarrassment and all those things. But as you are digging up those roots from the ground, the more you tug on it, the more you pull at it, eventually it's going to loosen up, and eventually it's going to come up. It's going to come out of the ground. And so you have to be willing to dig in and start pulling up the roots, no matter how deep they go. You can do it, okay? And then another thing was practicing self-compassion. We don't talk enough about this, because in our society, everything is go, 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 go all the time. And so we don't talk enough about taking a step back and loving on yourself and saying, I feel you. I hear you. I see you. I'm listening, little girl. I hear that you need me right now. I am giving you compassion, even though it was 15 years ago, even though it was, however long ago. I am still offering this compassion to you. And you do this by self-love practices, self-care practices that will help you to start invoking more compassion for yourself and for that little girl. And then number 5 is I challenged the negative beliefs that I had. When thoughts that were not aligned with where I was going and the path that I wanted to take, when they popped up, I would challenge it. Is this a thought that I created, or is this something that someone said about me? Is this something that someone said to me? Is this a story or a lie that I made up to myself many years ago that I've latched onto? Where are these thoughts coming from, and why are they coming up? And are they contradictory to the work that I am doing to learn how to instill more trust in myself and trust in other people? Okay. And then number 6 is I set boundaries. Setting boundaries is one of the best ways that you can start to build trust in yourself and trust for other people, because you're not allowing them to walk all over you. You are not being a people pleaser. You are establishing these guardrails around you. And so these guardrails are your protection. You don't have to be defensive. You don't have to always have this wall up, because if your boundaries are set and they are clear and they are established and you've communicated them, then when those boundaries start to get crossed, well, then you know that this is not something that I'm struggling with trust, because I've opened myself up to you. I have given you the opportunity to show me who you are and let me see the real you, but yet you keep stepping over this boundary. So that means that I can't trust you. I can't trust that the things that I establish for myself and for my well-being, you are going to honor that and you are going to respect that, versus having these boundaries set and saying, hey, as long as we can operate, and I'm talking about realistic boundaries, sis. I'm not talking about all this, unrealistic, fictitious mess, for lack of a better word. I'm talking about realistic, healthy boundaries that you've set, and you have someone around you, people around you that respect your boundaries and operate within those limits. Then you can start to trust them more. You can start to give that trust more, because they're earning it from you, right? And then number 7 is just practicing being vulnerable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If that is a place where you are uncomfortable initially, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Lean into that so that you can start pushing the boundaries, pushing the pushing the envelope as it relates to being open and being just being vulnerable, being sensitive, if you will, to the need of the relationship, whether it's with yourself or with anybody else, right? And gradually you will start to develop this feeling of trust for other people and for yourself. Now, I want to close with this. I want you to celebrate the small wins, the little teeny tiny steps that you make towards healing that inner child, giving her what she needs in order to establish healthy trusting habits. Celebrate those little wins. If you find yourself, if you were always the person to question when your husband goes out, and then, instead of questioning him every time, maybe it's when the behavior changes and, you start to notice that you're backing off a little bit more. Celebrate that. That's something to celebrate. That's an accomplishment in the right direction. So don't forget to celebrate yourself. I used to forget to celebrate me. Now I celebrate me if I do anything that's slightly remotely close to getting to the goal that I have. I celebrate that, right? Because that's progress, and we should always celebrate progress. So if this is something that you struggle with, if this is something that you find yourself saying, yeah, I definitely need to do some work in that department, well, then I invite you to consider joining us for our Little Girl 3-part series that is happening in March. We are going to recognize, we're going to remember, and we are going to realign with our inner child, with our little girl, so that the healing can either continue or start, right? For some people, it's starting. For some people, it's continue the process of healing that inner child so that we can continue to move through our relationships in a more trusting way and in a more healed way. If you have questions or if you want more information, do not hesitate to find the link somewhere in this video. It's going to be in the bio. It's going to be in the description. It's going to be somewhere where you can get plugged in. You can register for Little Girl. We kick off on March the 11th. And I want you to be a part of this journey with me, because listen, sis, the more you heal that inner child inside, the better, the more positive and effective and productive you will be, and you will start to see more personal elevation in your life. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you on the other side of Little Girl. Talk to you soon. Peace. Always, sis. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like this video, do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button. And if you don't want to miss out on any of my latest content as it's being released, go ahead and hit the notification bell icon as well. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah.